This is UC Santa Barbara, also known as UCSB. It's the place where this event is coming from. It's also where I teach, and it is arguably one of the most beautiful campuses in the United States. It also happens to be one of the greenest campuses in the United States. Organizations like US News and World Report, Sierra Club consistently rate it as one of the top 10 greenest campuses in the US, and we're very proud of that fact. We put a lot of work into making that happen. Organizations like US News, World Report, Sierra Club consistently rank us that, and we're very proud of that fact. We put a lot of work into it. But even a university like UCSB, as much as we put into our environmental efforts, has an environmental problem, and a big one. So we recently calculated the carbon footprint for this campus, including all aspects of the campus. That's not only the campus, gas use, electricity use, but also the vehicle fleet, campus housing, everything. And we were astonished to find that there was one particular activity that was responsible for a third of the carbon footprint, and that is air travel, by faculty and staff to talks, to meetings, and most of all, to conferences. To put a number on this, it's 55 million pounds of CO2 or equivalent gases released into the upper atmosphere where they do the most harm every year. To put that in human terms, that's equivalent to a city of 27,500 people in India for all aspects of their lives for a whole year. It's just absolutely extraordinary. So it might seem that the solution would be to something like this, just cut back on the amount of emissions that we have by not going to conferences. But conferences are incredibly important to us in academia because this is where new ideas are first tried out. It's where we work through ideas and actually develop knowledge through talking back and forth with new notions. On the other hand, flying is absolutely a privileged activity. Remarkably, only 1 in 20 people on the planet will ever get into an airplane. Even in the United States, half of Americans do not fly annually, and only a quarter fly 3 or more times a year. Because of this required travel that we have in academics, we often find ourselves in that last very rarefied group. If we weren't talking about air travel, if we were talking about ground transportation, we would not be the people biking or walking to work or taking mass transit or even riding in SUVs. We would be the riding in hybrids. We would be the people driving SUVs. So what's the solution? Well, for a year now at UCSB, we've been working on an alternative conference model. I'll tell you right off the bat, this is not some whiz-bang new technological thing. It doesn't involve 3D avatars or virtual reality. In fact, we like to say that it's sort of built on yesterday's rather than tomorrow's technology. And the reason is, and you'll hopefully understand as I go on further, we want a large global installed base of people who have access to this technology. And there are a couple main ones that we now use. One of the first, you probably have it yourself, is a smartphone. Remarkably, 2 billion people on the planet now own one of these devices. And among the other things that they can do, they can record high definition video at near broadcast quality standards. It's just absolutely remarkable. A few years ago, it was a huge, camera costing thousands of dollars. Now 2 billion people have that ability. The flip side, we also have the ability to watch video of that quality through higher speed internet. You all know this through things like Netflix and YouTube and all. You put them both together, which we've done for this conference model, and it means that we can, in a very egalitarian, democratic way, give speakers, the ability to record their own talks, and people attending the conference to view these talks at any time that they'd like. So what does this look like? I'll show you from a conference, our first conference, which is a proof of concept, one of the talks.
My name is Chris Robertson, and I'm going to talk about what is a cultural intervention. And this is a deep question that I've been thinking about for a while.
So is that, the same quality that you'd have as something like CNN and all? I'm not quite sure. But the fact is, it's very good quality. And if you've ever sat in the back of a room watching a conference talk, trying to look to see the person and hear them and all, this is much better. You don't have to just have a talk like this. It can be a screen recording of a PowerPoint or Prezi presentation, a hybrid going back and forth between speaker and the presentation, or something else altogether. So at this same conference, one of the speaker trios decided to actually make a mini documentary showing the area that they were going to talk about in their talk. So this was that.
We are members of a group called Waterways of the Illawarra. We live in the Illawarra region just south of Sydney. For the last couple of years, we've been walking our local waterways. We start at the sea and head inland as far as we can go. We position it as a socially engaged art project, but it's also simply a way of creating a deeper connection to the local area where we live.
So this is how the talks work. They're just recordings, videos that can stream at any time. In a way, it makes it far more convenient because you can attend a conference, and generally these conferences are open for 3 weeks, watching whatever you want to at any time when you want to. But watching and hearing the talks is just half of the process. The other thing is what we call Q&A sessions, question and answer sessions. And these are an incredibly important part of conferences because this is where ideas get worked through. This is where people go back and forth in discussion. So the way we've set it up, and again, this is based on sort of an older text-based technology similar to online forums, we allow people to have exchanges going back and forth over a series of weeks so that this renders sort of meaningless if there's a time zone difference. So you can pose a question to someone on the other side of the world and they can answer even though it may take 10 or 12 hours difference. So what those look like, this is an actual panel. Oops. This is a panel here, 3 speakers, and you'll see the Q&A underneath of it. There's a great deal of it. So at a traditional conference, a Q&A session lasts for like 15 or 20 minutes. You can have breakout sessions that last a little longer than that. But with this approach, you have far more discussion because people have much longer to do it. They have more time to think about it and more time to prepare their comments, even research them. And we found, once we finished with our first conference and we looked at it in comparison to a traditional conference, that the average panel generated 3 times more discussion than a traditional panel. And in fact, one of them generated over 10 times the discussion. And on our second conference, one generated 15 times more. This kind of discussion can literally fill a book. In fact, the discussion from either of these conferences is larger than a full book, and one panel had over 60 pages of discussion. So it seems clear that this is a viable alternative, but the one thing we didn't know is whether or not this would actually be well received by participants. So at the end of the first conference, we asked folks if they thought it was actually a successful event. And as it turns out, 1 out of 8 people were not quite sure if it was successful, but 7 out of 8 thought that this approach actually worked. It was very gratifying for us because we just weren't sure if people would like it. And it matters a lot, though, because what's on the table here is more than just environmental. So if we look here, we call this an NCN conference, that's nearly carbon neutral. And the first thing is when we finished the first conference, we crunched the numbers and we decided, tried to find out exactly how much more efficient a conference like this would be. So we were able to look at all aspects of the conference. We were able to see both, how far people would have flown if they had to fly in from the conference. Because, streaming video has its own carbon footprint, we were able to look at that as well. When we crunched all the numbers, we found out that this is about 1% of a traditional conference as far as its carbon footprint. And in fact, that's actually somewhat misleading because, with airliners and all, there's not much you can do to increase their efficiency. You make them a little lighter, you can use, biofuels for some of their fuel. But at most, you're probably going to get a 25% efficiency gain over the next few decades. This power needed here is all ground-based electricity, running servers and transmission lines and all that. At UCSB, as part of the UC system, we have a carbon neutrality initiative that aims by 2025 to get all of our electricity from renewable sources. And the UCSB will probably make that goal. When that happens, this is going to drop even further, maybe a tenth. So what that means is you could literally have 1,000 conferences like this for the same carbon footprint as a traditional conference. The second reason is that scholars can watch this and attend these conferences from anywhere in the globe. This is really important because if you think about it, the cost of airfare from pretty much anywhere in the developing world to pretty much anywhere in North America or Europe is often greater than the per capita income of those countries. That's effectively meant for decades now that scholars from across the world, from the majority of the world's countries, have been summarily excluded from academic conferences and really the academic conversation. In this case, however, anyone, anywhere can come to a conference like this. I mean, it might seem like we're trying to be beneficent and say, here, come to our conference, aren't we nice for letting you do this? But that's the wrong way to look at it. It's exactly the opposite way to look at it. The fact that most scholars from most of the world's countries have not been in this discussion, we've all been losing out because of that. Look at all the brain power that's been lost that can now be consolidated, collectively done through true global conferences like this. The next thing is that it's more accessible than its traditional counterpart. So for our second conference, every talk there was closed captioned for the hearing impaired. The conference websites are all made to be as accessible as possible to screen readers, which are used by people with visual impairments. And physical impairments as well, right? If you're in a wheelchair to get to a conference, where you have to get to an airport, go through security, get on an airplane, get off, go through all that, and then do it all over again, when you come back. None of that has to happen here. You can participate in a conference like this without ever leaving your home. The next thing is it creates a lasting open access archive. In academia, there's been a real debate going on in recent years regarding journals. And you may not know this, but like a university like UCSB can pay $1 million or more a year in subscriptions to journals. And they all have limited access. Only certain people, if you happen to be affiliated with the university, can get access to these journals. Well, in this case, a lasting archive, including that huge Q&A, and now with the most recent version, transcripts of all the talks, is instantly made accessible. So it used to be the case that, only people who were able to attend these events had access to this new cutting-edge work that was being done. If you didn't happen to have that ability, it could be years until it sort of came down to you in the form of a book or another. In places like, Harvard or Stanford, if you happen to go to one of those really phenomenal conferences, one of the maybe 100 people who did, you'd have all that access and no one else would have it. But now anyone, anywhere, will make this completely open access, can view the talks and the Q&A sessions. As I suggested, Q&A sessions are going to be, in some sense, deeper. People can spend more time on the question and answers, can go over a longer period of time. Whoops. The next is very important. So the conference coming up, the next one, which will be our third one that we're doing, the conference will not only be entirely closed captioned in English, but Spanish as well, opening it up to another 500 million people worldwide. It's also the case that if a speaker is not, used to the primary language of the conference, whether it's English, Spanish, or whatever, then you could close caption in that language if you wanted to, or in multiple language. This opens up the possibility in the beginning of true multilingual international conferences. And finally, it's a question of cost. So, for an individual traveling to a conference, it can be, more than a couple $1,000s, depending on the conference, all the costs associated with it. But more importantly, to put together an international conference regarding travel, accommodations, meals, everything else can be many thousands of dollars. And in fact, not every university and every institution will have this ability. This suddenly opens it up to anyone, anywhere, any institution. We used entirely open access software here that's available free of charge. So to put on a conference like this, it costs nothing whatsoever. And again, the whole notion is to open it up to a broader range of individuals. The fact is, we have to, you should have said this at the beginning, I guess, you have to admit that this will never be like a face-to-face conference. It's just not going to work the same way. But on the other hand, given all the advantages of a conference like this, environmental and social, it just seems that we need to begin seriously rethinking this problem. It's a huge problem for academia. We're not, so bold to think that our solution is the only solution, but we're very much here at UCSB trying to get a discussion going and to encourage experimentation like ours in new ways of tackling this problem and reinventing this old practice that honestly is kind of showing its age at this point. Thank you.